parts of the world still had humans hunting, a civilization was being born that built the first cities, learned to write, and made humans civilized for the first time. This was the Sumerian civilization, but without any modern. What was their daily life like? What did these people eat? How did they live? And the most surprising thing was that they had some customs that will shock you once you learn about them. To discover these mysteries, be sure to watch the video till the end. The story begins in the year 1922. It was a time when history books around the world had only one thing written, that human civilization began in Egypt. Schools taught children that the pharaohs and pyramids were the first signs of when humans stopped being wild and became civilized. But there was a British archaeologist, Sir Leonard Woolley. He had a question that made him. It was said that the prophet Abraham was born here. The great scholars of the world regarded this merely as a myth, but Woolley did not agree. He took a small team and went to the southern desert of today's Iraq. Woolley started excavation. Days passed, weeks passed, months passed. The temperature touched 50 degrees in the heat. Workers were falling ill, money was running out, and his boss sent a letter from London saying, "Come back, nothing will be found here." But one day his hoe struck something hard. Below that ruin was a huge stone structure, stepped, 3 stories tall, touching the sky. This was no ordinary building, it was a ziggurat. Woolley realized he had discovered something very big. There they found more than hundreds of graves, and among them was the tomb of Queen Puabi. The queen's skeleton lay on a stone bed, her body completely covered with gold jewels. But the queen was not alone, around her were 70 other skeletons. Woolley wrote in his diary that night that the civilization older than Egypt, which first gave the world writing, the wheel and law, was here, quietly sleeping under this ruin for 5,000 years, and no one even knew about it. This city was Ur. When European people wore animal skins in caves and the rest of the world hunted with stone weapons, at the same time, the Sumerians in this desert of Iraq were building buildings that touched the sky. That is why history. As Woolley and his team delved deeper into this city, a mountain of questions rose before them. They found star charts so precise that even today's astronomers are astonished. They found traces of canals built by the Sumerians. All this was built 5,000 years ago. So who were these Sumerians? This desert where nothing grows, where fire falls during the day and the cold freezes bones at night. How did these people arrive here, and most importantly, about 7,000 years ago? This was a time when today's Iraq looked completely different. There was no desert, but 2 mighty rivers flowed, Tigris and Euphrates. These rivers flowed from the mountains of Turkey and traveled all the way to the Arabian Gulf. But one thing must be understood, this place was no paradise. It was land full of marshes, swarming with mosquitoes and repeatedly flooded. No sensible person wanted to settle here, but still some people came, and all. Where did they come from? Some historians believe they descended from the Zagros mountains of Iran, where cold and hunger forced them to search for new land. Others say they came from even farther away, maybe Central Asia, but most surprisingly, we came from the sea. Our god Enki brought us here. This story is astonishing. And here comes another mystery that still baffles scientists today. That mystery is their language. Friends, most languages in the world. But the Sumerian language does not match any known language family in the world. It is as if this language suddenly dropped from the sky. Linguists call it a language isolate, but whatever it is, these people had arrived here. And they faced a big challenge. Where would the food come from? The land was fertile, but rainfall was almost none. There were rivers, but they were not enough for the fields. They began digging canals from the rivers. They diverted and controlled the water to reach the dry fields. This was the world's first irrigation system, and it worked wonders. Where nothing grew before, now wheat fields began to flourish. Barley fields spread far and wide. Date palm trees were planted along riverbanks. Canals filled with fish. One family could now produce enough food to feed 10 families, and this is where the real change began, when food was so abundant. Some people became weavers and started making cloth. Some became traders, buying and selling goods. Some became priests who began reading the skis. Earlier, everyone was just farmers. Now there were people doing different jobs. Winding crooked lanes turned into straight roads. And one day, the world's first city was established there. Its name was Eridu, say the Sumerians. Eridu was the city where kings descended from heaven. For them, it was not just a city, it was the center of their world. It was the place where humans first learned to be civilized, but Eridu was only the beginning. After it, one city after another arose, and now a new problem arose. When strangers became neighbors, who would manage these thousands of people? Who would decide who had what rights? Eridu was only the start, because after Eridu, one city after another emerged on Sumer's fertile land. This was the world's first metropolis. The walls of Uruk were 9 kilometers long and so thick that 2 chariots could race side by side on top of them. These walls were built by King Gilgamesh. In the middle of the city stood a huge temple of the god Anu. This temple was the tallest building of that time. When traders or travelers came from afar toward Uruk, the first thing they saw was this temple, but Uruk was not alone. Around it, one city after another was rising. Among them was Th. The streets of were so well planned that each house had water drains beneath it. The world's first drainage system was built here, and in this very was found Queen Puabi's grave that we mentioned earlier. Another city was Nippur. This was the place where the king of every city came for his coronation. It was believed that unless Nippur's chief priest laid his hand on your head, you were not considered a real king. Nippur was home to the god Enlil's temple. Next to Nippur was another beautiful Sumerian city, Lagash, a city of trade and craftsmanship. Its goldsmiths were famous throughout Mesopotamia. The most special thing about Lagash was its straight roads, built in a grid pattern like any modern city today. And here stood a special building, the world's first granary, where grain could be stored for years without spoiling. Friends, all these cities were neighbors but not one country. Each city was a world unto itself. Each city had its own king, and historians call this whole system the city-state system. Now the question is, these CI. In the beginning there were no kings. The priests ran the cities. The temple was the government. Priests collected taxes and made decisions, but when wars began between cities, priests could not handle these affairs. And thus began the world's first kings. It is said that about 4,800 years ago there was a king named Etana. Sumerian stories say he was the first king to unite the different cities. Then came another name, Lugaltsagesi. He was the man who first attacked the neighboring city of Umma and won it. His victory story is a paw. On this stone, a dreadful scene is carved: battlefield, scattered corpses. This is the world's first war memorial. Then came one of the most dangerous kings in Sumerian history, Sargon of Akkad. The story goes that he was the son of a priest who was. He gradually became the kingmaker, then the commander, and one day he dethroned his king. He raised his army and one by one took control of Sumer city-states. A gardener's son became. His army had 5,400 soldiers who ate with him every day. But friends, a civilization cannot run on just the king and the army. These cities housed millions. They needed food, so the question is, without trucks and planes. Friends, so far we have seen that the Sumerians built cities, made kings, and built walls, but their real marvel was their technology. The Sumerians made the world's first plow, and not just any plow, they made one. That means the ancestor of today's seeder machine was in the hands of a Sumerian farmer 5,000 years ago. They devised a trick to save soil fertility. They planted crops on the field one year and left it fallow the next year to let the land regain its strength. Today, this is called crop rotation. When grain production exceeded requirements, it was called surplus. But with this came a new problem. The Sumerians started sending their grain to faraway countries. They needed copper, which came from Oman. They wanted silver brought from the mountains of Turkey. They needed cedar wood from the forests of Lebanon. They needed precious blue stone lapis lazuli, which came from far Afghanistan. But friends, the most interesting thing comes now. On clay tablets of the Sumerians, a name is repeatedly found, Meluha. They wrote that M. For years historians wondered where Meluha was. Then when the Harappan civilization was discovered, the truth surfaced. Meluha was none other than our India, but such huge trade was impossible without one thing, and that was transport and tea. Around 3500 BC, a potter first spun a round wooden piece. Initially it was used to make pots, then someone thought why not put it on a cart, and thus the world's first bullock cart was made. Now what 10 people did together. But with so much trade, so much grain, so many carts, who would keep the accounts? One day, a priest sitting in a temple in Uruk picked up a wet clay tablet. He carved some marks on it with a pointed wooden stick. This was reedy. This was the world's first writing. Initially it was used only for accounts, who gave how much grain, who owed how much. But gradually people began writing laws, decisions, and letters. But friends, who were the millions living in these cities? How did they live? What were their homes like? What did they eat? Let's first talk about society. Sumerian society was like a pyramid. At the top were kings and priests, then merchants, landowners. Below them were commoners, farmers, craftsmen, potters, and at the very bottom, slaves. Now let's see a day in the life of an ordinary Sumerian. The city woke up even before the sun rose. Women got up first and lit the stove. For breakfast, barley porridge, dates, and milk. Men went to work, some to fields, others to markets or temples. Children's world was different too. Rich children received education, poor children learned work. At noon, everyone ate together, bread, fish, vegetables, and at night the family sat on the roof. Their clothes were made of wool and they wore layers resembling sheep's fur. They looked odd, like someone wrapped in a sheep's hide. Men kept beards but styled them in a special way, curly, oiled, and rounded underneath. Friends, you will be surprised to know that 5,000 years ago, when women elsewhere were considered only domestic, Sumerian women could buy land, run their own businesses, had a passion for decoration. They were just like us. Jewels found in Queen Puabi's tomb in Ur are still kept in museums worldwide. She wore a crown made of gold leaves on her head, blue lapis lazuli beads around her neck, and gold earrings. Archaeologists have found hundreds of small polished bronze mirrors from Sumerian homes, meaning even 5,000 years ago, a Sumerian woman groomed herself, styled her hair, and then began her day. Here children learned to write from morning till evening. Teachers were strict. If a child made a mistake, they were beaten with rods. At school, children learned writing alongside mathematics, astronomy, music, and law. And the biggest festival of the year was Eridu, the New Year festival lasting 12 days. The entire city was decorated and the most special features were music and beer. Yes, friends, the world's first beer was made in Sumer. They had a goddess named Ninkasi. They didn't drink beer directly. They sat around a big pot and drank through long straws because the barley grains floated in it. These straws are still found in Ur's graves, some made of silver, some of gold. But friends, all these details. How did it happen that without any calculator, telescope, or machine, people sitting in a desert became the world's greatest scientists and artists? Friends, the land of Mesopotamia was completely flat. No hills here. The Sumerians made the world's first baked bricks. They poured clay into molds, dried them in the sun, and then fired them in kilns. Excavations in Ur still uncover these bricks today. With these bricks, they built things that. This was a stepped pyramid but completely different from Egypt's pyramids. Egypt's pyramids were tombs, hollow inside, but a ziggurat was not a tomb. It was a staircase to heaven, a place where humans went to meet the gods. The most famous ziggurat of Ur still stands in Iraq's desert. Its foundation measures 64 meters long and 46 meters wide. It had 3 stories and at the top was the moon god's temple. They mixed baked bricks and tar to create a waterproof compound with which they built docks, canals, and water tanks. This tar is still stuck to the walls of Ur's ziggurat even after 4,000 years. Now let's talk about Sumerian science. Friends, why are there 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute? The answer lies with the Sumerians, where the rest of the world counted with 10 fingers. And surprisingly, 5,000 years later, this system is still alive in your watches. But more amazing was their understanding of the sky. Sumerian priests climbed temple roofs at night and spent hours watching the stars. They grouped stars into clusters, 12 zodiac signs, that is where your horoscopes began. Imagine, without telescopes. They were also great mathematicians. Archaeologists found a clay tablet called Plimpton 322, dated around 1800 BC, containing problems like trigonometry, similar to the Pythagorean theorem which was discovered much later in Greece. They were also artists. The greatest proof is the standard of a small wooden panel with such fine carvings that it still amazes people. On one side is a scene of peace with the king sitting in his court, music playing. Behind all this was a belief in a power for which they built ziggurats, counted stars, and offered sacrifices. Who was this power? Which gods did the Sumerians live and die for? Friends, for the Sumerians this world was not ordinary. Every tree, every river, every breeze was the work of some god. They believed thousands of gods ruled them, and each city had its own chief god. Uruk had. But friends, this great civilization that gave so much to the world, how did it end? About 4,300 years ago, the Akkadian Empire built by Sargon was at its peak. The cities on the banks of the Euphrates and Tigris, Uruk, Lagash, Akkad, shone with gold. It seemed this civilization would last forever. But here is a big truth of history, friends. No civilization lasts forever, no matter how powerful. During the reign of his grandson Naram-Sin, the Akkadian Empire reached its greatest height. He called himself king of the four directions. Not only that, he became the first Mesopotamian king to declare himself a god, but probably. The Sumerians believed that a king who disrespected the gods would drown his whole empire with him. And at that time, nature also played a game that proved this true. About 4,200 years ago, the weather suddenly changed, rain disappeared, the sky stayed dry for months, even years. Evidence still exists today. Scientists examined soil layers from that time, studied sediment samples from the sea bed and the rings of old trees. All showed the same answer. About 4,200 years ago, this area endured a severe drought lasting about 300 years. When food ran out, chaos erupted in the cities. Children died of hunger, mothers wept near dry fields, markets were empty. Cities that once pulsated with life slowly turned into graveyards. When a civilization becomes weak internally, external wolves come to tear it apart. A fierce tribe called the Gutians came down from the mountains. These uncivilized, wild-barking warriors. Weak cities one by one succumbed to them. Even after thousands of years of excavation, scientists have not found where the city of Akkad was, the city where 5,400 soldiers once ate together. It is so deeply buried in the ground that slowly people speaking Sumerian decreased. They were replaced by new groups, the Babylonians, Assyrians. The Sumerian language survived only in temples and priestly books like Sanskrit today, and then one day the last S. It was buried under the soil for thousands of years. Friends, how did you like this documentary, and what should be the topic of your next documentary? Write in the comments and also tell us from which state you are watching this video.